And
Hello and welcome to the World Sand Project. I'm Shelley Carney.
and I'm Toby Younis. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk a little bit about a river that runs through it, where it is New Mexico. And again, thanks for joining us today. I have a number of envelopes that I picked up from our mailbox today. Unfortunately, I was just coming home from traveling, so I haven't had a chance to open them. And I do want to apologize to Gerald Vacker, who sent me a package of sand from Prince Edward Island that I promised we were going to do today, but I got home a half hour before the show started. I stopped by the UPS store, picked up a bunch of envelopes, didn't have time to process his sample, but I will have it for you next week, Gerald. So what I had to do in the meantime was process a sample or show you, I'm going to share with you a sample that I had already processed, that I had already put together, and that I had done the sampling work on. So we're going to show that today. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So both Shelley and I know this area because the area that we're going to be talking about today, because we live very nearby the Rio Grande. And the one that I'm going to talk about today is, let's do a screenshot here. And the river that we're going to talk about today is the Rio Grande River. And as you can see, it starts up inside of Colorado in the kind of a rift canyon. And this rift travels all the way down through New Mexico and partially into Texas. And I don't know whether you can see it right here. You can see this is where New Mexico meets the border with Mexico, but with Texas as well. And then the river continues to travel through this area, and you can see it forms the border between Mexico and Texas, and eventually pours into the Gulf of Mexico just around Brownsville, Matamoros. But the Rio Grande has a famous history. It was the river that, as you can see, because it went through the middle of New Mexico. I'm getting a hum someplace.
A what?
A hum in my headset.
The fan?
Might be. Maybe. And as it went through New Mexico, it provided. It provided the Spanish who were coming up across the Mexican border. Of course, there was no Mexico, New Mexico, and Texas at the time, but were coming up through there along the Camino del. Let's see, it was the Jornada del Muerto, the journey of death. Because they had to travel through this area. And although they were traveling along the river, sometimes they'd have to get away from it. But that's how most of New Mexico was populated. Prior to that, of course, the Native Americans had built pueblos all along the river, all the way from northern New Mexico, where the Hickory Apache are right now, all the way down to this area right here, where some of the southern pueblos are. There were ancient pueblos all along the river as well, but it was populated as early as 1,000, 1,300 years ago. And then the Spanish came in the mid-centuries, starting in the late 1500s all the way through the 1700s. And by that time, we were getting I guess what you would call Americans at that point, started surveying the river as well. So it has a long and storied history. And it's had a couple of movies made about it. So, but interestingly for us, the Rio Grande, I'm going to show you exactly where I took this sample right here. So I live in Bernalillo, but I live west of the Rio Grande. The Bernalillo proper is mostly east of the Rio Grande, but there's a little spit of Bernalillo that pops out into an area west of the Rio Grande. And just, I'm going to say about a mile and a half away from me, is the Willow Creek trailhead and open space that gives me access to the Bosque Trail. And the Bosque is literally goes all the way from where Route 550 crosses the river in Bernalillo, all the way south. I used to ride the Bosca Trail when I was living in downtown Albuquerque, and it travels all the way south of Albuquerque to the city limits and then comes back in kind of a P shape. This one, that area down there is paved. It was about a 20-mile ride on paved trail. This one is not paved, but it's what I'd call improved.
Okay. Impacted dirt.
Impacted dirt with cedar. Not cedar, cinder. So it's very nice to walk in, especially during the fall. We had kind of a funny fall this year because it was a little bit early, and they changed. I'm not sure why. Everything changed really quickly, so I didn't get any real pretty fall shots. It was interesting to see the difference as I was out east this last weekend because they were just coming into their fall color, which is late for them. So, but it was beautiful color. Everything was,
I
reds
think
and
it's
oranges.
like that all the time now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everything's moved a month.
Everything's changed. Yeah.
Everything's pushed a month.
So the area that I collected, and
Hey,
I parked
Sunny 7.
my car here, and hiked into the bosque along the trail, going what would be basically north and east. And then I found a little side trail that took me to this area right here. And I don't know if you can see it on this map. I'll show. I've got close-ups of it in just a minute. But that basically is a beach. I don't know how else to describe it. It's a beach on the Rio Grande. It's probably covered part of the year in the early spring when we're experiencing the runoff. But later in the year, after the water's been used for irrigation all along the Rio Grande and through New Mexico, the water's much lower and much browner, because a lot of that water goes back into the river. A lot of the irrigation water will go back into the river. So you find the clear Rio Grande, I would say north of Espanola, before its junction, its convergence with the, is it the San Juan that it converges with? And it gets real brown there. Above that, it's clear and supports trout. We don't support trout down in this area because it is the water carries more silt in it, and because it's warmer. Good trout fishing is north of Espanola in New Mexico. But I thought you might like to see where I collected this sample, again based on this area, so you can see how coming through Colorado, I collected this sample right just north of Albuquerque here in Bernalillo. All right, so that gives you a sense. Let me show you some pictures that I took of the area, and I'm going to have to go backwards, I think. Yeah, let me go backwards real quick. So I'm going to just, okay. So the first picture I took, and this is what I recommend when you collect your sand sample, take that plastic bag, just put it down in the sand, and take a picture of it there. And if you do that with your cell phone, what it effectively does is it not only collects the picture of the background sand, but it also collects the GPS coordinates, so I can record those GPS coordinates in our database. And of course, it records the date and time, all the information that I would need to be able to put in our database is collected when you take that with your cell phone, and that's exactly what I did. And I used that information to put in the database. So, like we did when we had Shelley collect some sand for you. So this is the area as it goes directly across the river. And again, it's much lower than it was in that picture. It's a nice broad river at this point. But again, it's after a lot of the water has been taken for fall irrigation. In the background, you'll see the Sandia Mountains that are east of us. Our sun rises over the Sandia Mountains every day. And
Our sun.
Our sun. It's
we don't want to share it with anybody.
Our New Mexico side. And it was good to be back. When I left Washington this morning, it was, I picked up another sore throat from the babies while I was there. When I left Washington, it was 23 degrees. When I got to Chicago, it was 15 degrees. And I came into Albuquerque, and I was wearing my jacket. And one of the officers at the Albuquerque airport said, "You're probably not going to need that, sir." Like, oh, no kidding. So, and he was right.
Yeah, but you're having an Arctic blast across the Midwest.
Is that what
this
they're
past
experiencing?
week,
Yeah, no, we caught the front end of it in D.C. and kind of the middle of it in Chicago as I was traveling back in this direction. So basically, what I did is I took a picture in front of me, a picture to the right of me, to the left of me, to the right of me, and that's what I'd like you to do when you take your sand samples, so we get a sense of where they are. Because I want to continue to take these pictures and see how it's changed as the sand is depleted in various ways. So I was serious about this as a beach. It's a big, long beach, and there were actually people out there treating it like it was a beach. The kids, although I thought it was a relatively cold day, the kids had swim trunks and T-tops, tank tops on, and they were playing in the water right there along that beach area that you see here. But I imagine during the summer months it gets a lot more, traffic than that. And you can see this area right here is actually, there must be some runoff that comes from that. And if I go back to my map or the overhead view, you'll see that's that area right here that runs off just a little bit. So I took a couple of steps back. Oops, let me go. Okay, so we were there and took a couple of steps back. That is downstream as the river flows towards the south. And this area here was wet, and I didn't collect the sand from there. I collected it from the dry area. And if you have a choice between collecting wet sand or dry sand, I would prefer dry because to put it under the microscope so that it doesn't stick together, I'm going to have to dry it out anyway. Again, this is the photo directly in front of me, and we're back to that map. So let's take a look at the sand. I'm going to close this window here. And as you can see, this is kind of a wide shot for the sand. As you can see, it's a lot more colorful than the sand that we saw coming from our sample last week that was on a beach in the Northeast in Connecticut. So I'm going to work to get this in focus so you can see it. But look at all the colors, and a lot of these stones are crystalline. If you look at this, there's kind of a green crystal, blue crystals. There's some jasper in there. There is some feldspar, and of course, there's lots and lots of real good-sized quartz, But I noticed that there was a lot of color. Down here is, let me see if I can get that one in focus. I have to adjust the focus because the sand is in a little cup, and it's. But if you look at this stone right here, it kind of has the color of a ruby, And again, they're translucent, so there's lots of color and a lot of translucent little tiny gems is what they look like to me. I'd need our friend back, our what is she? Environmental studies.
She's an earth sciences
teacher, and a degreed geologist to have her identify these for me. But I do want you to know I have ordered both the National Geographic and the Smithsonian handbooks of field geology so I can start figuring out what these things are. But what I liked about it was all the color. And what I've done is I collect the sample into a, let me open this up. I'll put it back in just a second so you guys can see what I'm doing. I collect the sample in a small vial and I label it with a number. So when you send it to me, I'll label it with that number, put it in a small vial, and then I take a little bit of it, and you don't need much. And this is a quartz glass jar, bowl, I guess, how to describe it. I don't know whether it's intended for this purpose, but I'm using it for that purpose, and that's what I'm putting under the microscope to share with you all. So... But again, you can see the variety of colors in comparison.
No, they can't. You can.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Let me go back to the window shot? Screenshot. Yeah.
Oh.
So you can see the variety of colors that we, in comparison to the shot that we had last week. And so eventually what I'll do is I'll take photographs of each of these samples, and I will include them in the set of photographs that I upload to Google Photos. And I'll put that link in the description box below, so if you guys want to take a look at them. So let me move it around until I find something really interesting. So you'll see the edge of the glass bowl. Let's see what we got there. So I wish that purple stone was in the middle.
That purple one at the bottom?
No, there was one up at the
the
top that
red.
was closer. So let's zoom in just a little bit more, get a closer look. And the zoom is separate from the focus. So I've got to zoom and then do some focus. So just be patient with me. There we go.
There's like solid yellow and then like
I think the
crystal
solid yellow is the jasper, and the translucent yellow. There's a little tiny hair in there. You see?
Yeah.
The translucent yellow is probably quartz that has been yellowed by the sun, by being out in the sun, based on my reading of my geology book. Like I said, I'd rather have a geologist here to help me, but we'll have to keep it. We'll have to invite Rick to one of our shows. But as you can see in the images that I showed you before, this is just regular sand. You know, it looks like it would be difficult to tell this sand a photograph of, you know, of the, not the close-up photograph, but just somebody standing in this sand and a picture of it. It would be difficult to tell that sand from the beach sand that we saw last week. But what's it's going to be a long day. But once we zoom in on it like this under the microscope, you can tell there is significant difference. I should start making comparison photos. But,
yes, you should.
you know, so there's this blue stone that looks almost like lapis here and here and here. And then we've got something red that's probably jasper. What I don't see, the last time I looked at this, one of these pieces, I thought I saw some very dark black basalt in it. I don't see that in this particular sample. Let's see if we can move it around a little bit and see what we can get from it. So for those of you that have any interest in it, I am using an Amscope stereo microscope. And mounted on top of the stereo microscope is a 41 megapixel Haier is the company name. They're a Chinese company. Haier 41 megapixel camera that's specifically designed for using in a microscope. And the maximum sized image that I can get out of it as I go through the USB port into the computer is 1920 by 1080. But if I'm making a video, recording a video, it has a SD card slot in it. And if I record a video to the SD card, onto the SD card, it'll shoot at 4K. But I feel like this 1920 by 1080 is good enough for what we're doing here today. All right, let's go in even further. I'm going to see how far in I can go and still get focus. There we go. So the problem with zooming in this far is you end up with a very shallow depth of field. It's kind of the nature of microscopes. But here's a real good shot of a lot of the quartz crystals. And to me, this piece right here looks exactly like lapis lazuli. And down here. This to me looks like jasper, although it has a little bit of translucence to it. Don't you think?
Maybe citrine?
It could be, very well. Let me see if I can... it's hard to get it at this magnification. But look at this one. At this magnification. That, to me, is a really amazing stone just because it has so many colors in it, and one would have to wonder where did that all come from as it traveled from some mountaintop in, you know, Colorado down through the Rio Grande. Let me see if I can